Welcome into another week, Rivalry Week edition of the Countdown to Kickoff presented by Dread River. Damian Mitchell, Conrad Van Order, Molly Robinson holding things down for you. And again, we wouldn't be here without our friends from Dread River. Y'all know exactly what's going on this weekend. If you are not going to Tuscaloosa for the Iron Bowl, go to 2400 7th Avenue South. I'm telling you, it's probably going to be packed. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a lot of people there. Again, all the drinks will be on they're made there. They're in the distillery. You can get you a bourbon ham fog. I've been trying to tell y'all that is the best old fashioned they have. And of course, they're Blue Agave, and they just released their second batch in stores now, so you can go and get that and tell them that your friends from Jocks 94.5 sent you over there. So you might as well just get right to it. It's Iron Bowl week. And what we saw last week between Auburn's trip to Oklahoma and also Conrad's trip to Oklahoma and what happened with Auburn and Texas A&M. And it feels like the pendulum is starting to swing a little bit because of Auburn's 43-41 4-overtime victory over Texas A&M and Alabama's crushing 24-3 defeat to Oklahoma, this game has a whole different life. Because at one point in time during the season, Auburn fans like, oh, yeah, it's time for basketball. We'll see what Bruce Pearl and those boys got. Then you get a win over Louisiana Monroe, and it's like, oh, yeah, we're going to get there. Now, I will say the win over Texas A&M, that's massive. It is massive for everything that you still want to accomplish and get into a bowl game, but it's still the Iron Bowl in Bryant-Denny. And I think that's where I'm starting to, all right, history has shown me for the past decade or so that when this game goes to Bryant-Denny, it's usually not competitive. You kind of know what's going to happen. Alabama starts to put their foot to the gas, and nobody really knows. Everybody pretty knows what's going to happen because now, to me, I understand what we saw from Jalen Milroe in that against Oklahoma and how bad he looked at the quarterback position. And Oklahoma's defense, they showed up to play. Now, the biggest issue to me is I was not expecting Oklahoma to be able to line up the football and say, we're not even asking Jackson Arnold to throw it. We'll just run it down your throat. And that's exactly what Oklahoma did. I haven't seen Auburn do this consistently, so it's hard for me to believe because I just think Hugh Freeze is either going to overthink it or he's just going to say, hey, Peyton, now's your chance to show me that this is why we have you as our starting quarterback. So this game can go one or two ways. It can be Alabama remembers exactly who they are, and they go out there, handle their business, and say, hey, you know what, the season, we'll let the chips fall where they may. If we sneak into the college football playoff, so be it. But it's the first chapter of the Kalen DeBoer era in Tuscaloosa. Or Auburn can show up like they have the past 2 weeks and say, you know what? We had a little snafu in the early parts of the season, and now we're on a roll, and we're finding their way to the Birmingham Bowl. But the closer we get to kickoff, the more I start to think, okay, I'm going to use that Oklahoma game as like the anomaly. It's probably the worst I'm going to see Alabama play because it's the Iron Bowl. There's no more, like they say, you can throw the record books out the window. We know exactly what this rivalry presents, but I do think it's going to be an exciting game on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly sets up a lot differently than I think any of us expected going back a couple of weeks. But, you kind of mentioned it. But, I mean, the obvious is if Alabama plays anything like they did at Oklahoma, then Auburn's going to dog walk them in Bryant-Denny Stadium. And there's going to be a lot of questions from the fan base about Kalen DeBoer and what the future of this program looks like because this is a team that, again, I understand I'll get into Auburn in a second, but this is an Auburn team, granted, similar to Oklahoma, that has been pretty bad most of the year. Mm-hmm. Granted, the last 2 weeks you've played significantly better than you have really at any other point in the season, and particularly Peyton Thorne, what he was able to do against Texas A&M. He did have the one interception late, but that was probably the best game that's definitely the best game he's played at Auburn, given the opponent that lined up on the other side of the field. And even going back to his days at Michigan State, I think you'd probably be hard-pressed to find a more impressive performance from him even back then. I understand where the confidence is coming from there, but if you're Alabama, this is a team that has shown, whether it was turnovers early in the year, miscues on special teams that have cost them really throughout the entire course of the season, questionable play calling on both sides of the ball at times. This has been an Auburn team that has found different ways to lose football games throughout the year. And I find it hard to separate what we've seen the last 2 weeks from the rest of the season. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe they truly have turned a corner and they're going to go beat Alabama soundly. And, we're going to talk about, where was that Auburn team the first 9 games of the season that ended up on a 3-game winning streak? But still, this is an Auburn team that has shown that they have struggled when they can't run the ball effectively. Peyton Thorne, outside of the one game against Texas A&M has been pretty poor against Power 5 competition, particularly in SEC play. And if you're Alabama, you go back and, like you said, hopefully the Oklahoma game is an anomaly, because this is a team that for the month leading into Oklahoma looked like one of the best teams in the entire country. And, if you're Alabama, I look at it as you can have some problems with the run game for Auburn, because as we saw for Oklahoma, it wasn't just Jackson Arnold. Their running backs were able to do a lot of damage to Alabama as well. And they haven't been a great run defense over the course of the season. They haven't. But you also look at the Oklahoma game, and there were just perplexing play calling and situations where it was obvious that you needed to sell out to stop the run, and they just refused to do that. And so I like to think that going back to the drawing board, the coaching staff isn't going to make those same or going to have those same issues going into the Auburn game that they did against Oklahoma. On the flip side of it, if you look at the offense, my biggest thing with the Alabama offense with Nick Sheridan and Kalen DeBoer and their game planning this week is, what is your plan B? Because clearly we've seen, as we saw with Oklahoma, and I would expect Auburn to try to do the same thing, when they limit Jalen Milroe's ability to run the football, as we've seen in all three of Alabama's losses this year, he has 28 rushing yards combined in those 3 games. Combined. That's averaging almost not even 10 yards a game on the ground for Jalen Milroe in their losses. So you know what Auburn's going to try to do to limit this offense. So my question is, for the offensive coaching staff, what is your plan B? What are you going to go to when that doesn't work, or if that doesn't work? And we've seen with this Alabama team something that is so important for them. It's important for everybody, but it's especially important for Jalen Milroe in this offense, is to get off to a good start. How are you going to do that? What are you going to call on that first drive to get this offense in a rhythm? Because it doesn't need to be quarterback power like it was against Oklahoma, where you're running it up the middle, it's not working, and for whatever reason you continue to go back to that play call until you've done it 7 or 8 times with no success, and then you move off of it. So that's my thing, is whether it's handing the ball off to the tailbacks more, please, that would probably not be a bad area to go, or if it is just trying to find more consistency in the passing game and giving Jalen Milroe easy, quick passes where he's not, please, no more passes to the boundary. Like I think we've seen going back over the last couple of years, that is a throw that he struggles with reading the defense. And especially when you have good linebackers like Auburn does, that makes those throws even more difficult for you. So a lot of this game, in my opinion, it comes down to the mental state of this Alabama football team, and it comes down to the coaching staff, right? You have now seen what teams are going to do both offensively and defensively, because Oklahoma ran a very similar offensive game plan to Vanderbilt earlier in the year. So how are you going to be able to counteract that? Because a big criticism of them has been their inability to make adjustments, whether it's on a week-to-week basis or in-game scenarios. And as we know, this is an Auburn team that last year came into, or it was in Auburn, but they came up against an Alabama team that ultimately made the college football playoff and almost beat them if it wasn't for an incredible, gravedigger play with a quarterback that completed, 6 passes last year in Peyton Thorne. They were able to run the football, and they were able to give Alabama some problems on offense. And this is an Auburn team that was less talented last year that took them to the wire. Granted, as you said, it is in Bryant-Denny. Auburn hasn't won that game since Cam Newton was there. And Cam Newton's not walking through those doors on Saturday. But if Peyton Thorne looks like the quarterback we saw against Texas A&M, I think this Auburn team can cause a lot of problems for Alabama, not to mention all of the momentum they have, the hype they have, trying to get to a bowl game, trying to change the narrative a little bit of what this season that's been very disappointing for Auburn, and trying to finish it off with, a little bit of a cherry on top. So Alabama's going to have their hands full. Alabama's the better team. Alabama has the game at home. I don't want to get into this because they don't deserve it, but there is still a chance that Alabama finds their way into a college football playoff. So show me that. Show me that you want it. Show me that you want the opportunity. And at the end of the day, if you get left out of the playoff, which in my opinion they should, but if you do, you can look at it and say, well, we at least put a pretty good, last impression out there for the committee to look at. So it's going to be an exciting game. I think it's going to be a very competitive game. I have a lot of questions for Alabama that stem with where they are mentally, because I have no questions about where Auburn is at mentally. It's just, can Alabama pick themselves off the mat after what happened in Norman, Oklahoma, and put their best effort forward? Because the Alabama team that we saw against LSU or Missouri, if that team shows up, well, this thing can get sideways pretty quickly. But I'll be honest, as an Alabama fan myself, why would I have confidence that I'm necessarily going to get that from Alabama? Because we've now seen that there's really no consistency to what you get from them this year.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. And I can sense your frustration of just how the last time we saw Alabama be on the football field, it left a lot to be desired. You were truly disgusted. And I think a lot of Alabama fans were truly disgusted as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was probably going back to 2007 Louisiana Monroe, I mean, that was probably the most disgusting loss that I've seen for Alabama since then. And a lot of it is you scored 3 points on the road against a team that has a respectable defense, but again, an Oklahoma team that has beaten one team in the SEC this year, and it was Auburn because of a late pick six that ultimately turned that game into Oklahoma's favor. It's just... It's frustrating, and talking to people this week, whether it's the discussions we've had on Morning Jocks with some of our listeners, or the guest on Mac and Cube, or on Three Man Front, the conversations that have been had on those shows, everybody seems to have the same response, which is they are stunned by what happened. And it wasn't the fact that Alabama lost; it was the way that they lost. And this is a quick turnaround, but let's be honest: if you can't get up for the Iron Bowl, if that's not motivation enough to go and check yourself at the door and go, am I doing everything that I can in practice, in preparation, in film study, so that when I step on the field on Saturday, it doesn't matter what happened last week. And this is a whole different game. This is a rivalry game. That shouldn't matter for Alabama. But the fact that you have to question that right now, I think says a lot about where this team is coming off the Oklahoma loss.
I agree with you 100%. It seems like the castle's crumbling for Alabama, but we're not there yet. We're not there yet. But the Iron Bowl is...
Lane Kiffin might be, but
yeah, man.
Hopefully we're not.
I'm telling you, Auburn could write a mean story, man. They could be the final chapter of what could be the last great American dynasty. But who knows, man? That's why we love the Iron Bowl. And that happens at 2:30 on ABC. Greg McElroy on the call, calling his first Iron Bowl. So it should be a lot of fun there in Bryant-Denny. We got so much more to break down here.
I actually realized that might be bad because Greg was...
he was
the quarterback the last time that Auburn won in Bryant-Denny. So
listen, put my Brian Windhorse.
I'm just saying.
Put my Brian Windhorse fingers up. It's like, the last time Greg McElroy was there in Bryant-Denny, Alabama sure did lose. But we shall see. So much more to break down here on the Jocks Countdown to Kickoff. Keep it locked right here on Jocks 94.5.
Welcome back into the Rivalry Week edition of Countdown to Kickoff here on Jocks 94.5. Conrad Van Order, Damian Mitchell, Molly Robinson with you here. We just got done breaking down the Iron Bowl for you. Of course, that's the big one here in the SEC. Well, really in the entire country. I don't care if you're a Michigan and Ohio State fan. The Iron Bowl is the best rivalry in college football, and we are proud to claim it here in the state of Alabama. But a lot of other games going on, especially one in the state of Texas with major college football playoff implications on the line. The renewal of a classic rivalry in college football, Texas and Texas A&M. Can't wait to watch this game. Can't wait to break it down in just a minute. But first, let me remind you again about our friends at Dread River Distilling Company. They're 2400 7th Avenue South in downtown Birmingham. You can see some of their fine offerings here on the table in front of Damian and I as well. They also have wonderful merch. You can see the shirt I got on. Damian's rocking the shirt. We got the hat as well. So appreciate everything they do for us here on Countdown to Kickoff. And if you need a place, whether you just want to grab a drink, you want to grab a bite to eat, you want to watch the games, Dread River is a great place to do that because you can do all three of those things there at the same time. I know Damian mentioned the morning fog or the Birmingham fog earlier, which was a phenomenal old fashioned that they treated us to when we went out there. They also have their sherry finished rye, which is their most award-winning liquor there. It has won gold medals at the Bartender Spirits Award, the San Francisco World Spirits Competition, the South's Best, the Enthusiast, a number of other places. So go out there. Check out Dread River Distilling Company or go to your local ABC or package store and ask them what offerings they have from Dread River. And if they don't have them, request it because then they will go and contact our friends at Dread River and they will hook you up there. So appreciate everything they do for us. Go visit them in Birmingham, 2400 7th Avenue South. All right. A big game here in the SEC, the biggest game this week in terms of college football playoff implications. That is going to be Texas and Texas A&M. They're in College Station. This is going to be your primetime 6:30 p.m. kick on ABC. And Damian, we have, we just talked about the Iron Bowl and Auburn coming off that big win over Texas A&M in 4 overtimes. So you now have a Texas A&M team that's sitting there at 8-3. Texas at 10-1, still ranked in the top 3, the highest ranked team in the SEC. But they haven't played anybody, or they played somebody and they played Georgia and they got their butt whooped. So a lot of us are still looking to see something from Texas that makes us believe, maybe not that they have the talent to belong in the college football playoff, but we just haven't seen them compete at a high level against let's be honest, a quality opponent. And so this game against Texas A&M, the winner of this game will go to the SEC championship game. They will play Georgia with a automatic bid in the first round of the college football playoffs on the line there. But I look at this game for Texas A&M. Let's be honest. I think we can admit that they probably were looking ahead a little bit to this game last week. They were more talented than Auburn. I know Jordan Hare's a great play, or a very difficult place to play. Peyton Thorne played out of his mind. Auburn came out hot. But I think you have to give credit to Texas A&M for kind of being able to bounce back and having a chance there late in the game where they had the lead and Auburn ultimately kicks a field goal and sends it to overtime. But for them to claw back in that kind of environment, I think you have to give them some credit for that. But now you're going up against a completely different beast in Texas, or so we think. Mm-hmm. And, my question going into this game is just how badly, how bad was that loss for Texas A&M last week, right? What is your mental state, similar to what we talked about with Alabama going into this game? Because it's an emotional game. It was a long game, a night game in Jordan Hare. The environment, the atmosphere was incredible. So now that you're having to bounce back this week, and this is just part of playing the SEC, right? It's week in and week out. It's a dogfight. And now you have the renewal of a big rivalry game. I think Texas wants to prove to all the doubters that, hey, we are as good as our rankings suggest. So I go into this game and I look at Texas and I go, what is your offense going to do in the trenches? How is your offensive line going to hold up against that defensive front from Texas A&M? Because we've talked about it all year. They are very, very good, very, very talented up there with Nick Scorton, Shamar Turner, and some of those other guys there in Aggie land. And we've seen this Texas team, let's be honest. I mean, okay, the Kentucky game, I know you look at the score and you go, oh, okay, that game wasn't very competitive. But Kentucky, held their own at times in that game. Arkansas was obviously a little bit scary for them. Vanderbilt was scary as well. So this is a Texas team that's struggled. And you look at a team like Kentucky, who has a good defensive front as well. Quinn Ewers dealing with an ankle injury. How is that going to impact this game? Because I ultimately think if Texas A&M is able to put a lot of pressure on Quinn Ewers in that front for Texas offensively, I could see this game kind of leaning towards the Aggies a little bit and a little bit of a pissed off revenge mode from what just happened down on the Plains.
Yeah, and I think for Texas, it's show us, prove it to us. If you are as good as you think that you are at this point in time, for you to be so high in the rankings with that loss to Georgia, like you said, the only time we've seen you play a team truly just worth the damn, you got beat to sleep. And I don't know. The more I watch Texas, it's with other teams, they handle their business. I'd say Texas doesn't, but they don't do it in dominating fashion. Like, I feel like they let teams just hang around. Then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, let's wake up now and go out here and perform. Well, if you do that against Texas A&M, they can run you off the field.
Yes.
And it can be embarrassing. And I agree with you 100%. I think Texas A&M probably got caught thinking, this is Auburn team. Yeah, night game in Jordan Hare, blase. We'll go out there and do what we need to do. And they felt that they could just roll the ball out and beat the brakes off of them. Well, now that you looked up and you were down 21-0, and you had to pretty much fight and claw. And really and truly, Amari Daniels, you have to catch that 2-point play. I don't care if you're a running back, it hits you square in the face. Like, your hands are right there. You saw it develop. You were in the perfect spot. You're open. Just catch the football. But you end up losing to Auburn, an Auburn team that was just pretty much as happy to be there. Is okay, we got y'all here. We might as well win the ball game. So I look at this Texas A&M and Texas matchup on one, okay, the health of Quinn Ewers. Is he going to be 100%? If Arch Manning has to play, we saw how shell-shocked he looked against that Georgia defense. Texas A&M defensive front, now, again, granted, I know what we saw last week, they're still pretty good. Like, you still have to find a way to block those guys up front. And if you have your moments in this against that secondary, they look gettable. I do think when you look at the weapons that Texas has compared to what Auburn's had, I think they're, it's tit for tat as far as talent. But I think for Texas, it's leave no doubt. That's the biggest thing. It's every game that you play, you still kind of leave away just, Texas, they're good. But again, they're going against the likes of a Kentucky, the Mississippi States of the world. So it's okay, but you still don't feel confident in what they're handling their business. And now you have that opportunity against one, your big rival that wants to embarrass you because you're in the SEC. They already don't like you. So to me, I think the pressure's more on Texas of, all right, if you are as good as we think that you are, or you're expected to be game in and game out, go out there and do it against a quality opponent, and then we'll hear you out. And then you go to the SEC championship and let the chips fall where they may. You finally get a rematch against Georgia. But for Texas A&M, For everything that you have accomplished since you've been in the SEC, which ain't really much besides a Heisman Trophy winner and one COVID year that y'all swear up and down 2020 was going to be a difference maker, but okay, you see what happens. That's what happens. You have Kellen Mond as your quarterback. But I think right now, if you're Texas A&M, if you want to stake your claim of, you know what, we were here before you. There's a reason why we were here before you. We're going to show you. This is your golden moment. Do not blow it. And it's just. One, I do think it's an electric rivalry because, again, now it has the full SEC flavor on it, the glitz and the glamour that come with it. But it's Texas, you need to prove it. Texas A&M, you need to shut the naysayers up about Texas. Because to us here in, SEC country where we've had you for all this time, it's, all right, y'all do a lot of rah-rah, y'all got a lot of money, but every time that we need y'all to do something, it's, oh, you blow it. So I think for Marcel Reed, too. I don't know what the game plan was. I think maybe Auburn kind of knocked him out of their game plan. But he doesn't need to throw it a lot. Like I think that the more you can utilize him in space and just try to set up a run game with the read option RPOs, I don't know if he's just like a stand up in the pocket and look down the field and just dice people up. I don't think that's the strength of his game. And then you get him at home. I know College Station is going to be rocking. The chips are in your favor. Like, you have everything right here. It's just, can you finally get over that little brother mentality of, oh, yeah, we're Texas A&M. We're here. Screw Texas. They're not the real UT. They're TU and stuff like that. Well, shut them up. That's what it comes down to. Can you shut the big brother up? And now's your opportunity to do it.
Yeah, and I think, if you're Texas A&M, you look at this as, all right, well, if you win this game, you're going to go to the SEC championship for the first time since joining the conference, and you can block Texas from going to the SEC championship in their first year in the conference.
Yep.
I think that's certainly going to fire you up a little bit. And, you brought up Marcel Reed, and if you look at, Texas's defense, they've been fantastic throughout the course of the year. Granted, outside of Georgia, you haven't really played that many, I guess what you would consider high-powered offenses. And some people might even debate that about Georgia at times. But you're giving up over 100 yards on the ground every game. Your pass defense has been great. You're averaging under 150 yards given up through the air every game. But you are a little susceptible in the run. And that's where, as you brought up Marcel Reed, I think that he can be, he is such a big part of this game for Texas A&M because if you are able to use him, kind of maybe even like Pavia was used in the Vanderbilt game where, okay, he turned the ball over a couple of times, but he had 160 yards passing, a couple of touchdowns, a couple of interceptions, but he had almost 70 yards on the ground and another touchdown there. And it's just kind of that grinded out mentality. And, I think we would agree that Marcel Reed is a little more dynamic than a guy like a Diego Pavia is. Now, he doesn't have the experience of it, and that's another thing that comes into this as, this is a big moment for a young guy that I think coming into this year probably didn't expect to have a ton of playing time, and now he's kind of been thrust in this position. I think he's done a pretty good job overall, but are they going to, like you said, are they going to continue to try to get him to throw the ball down the field, or are you going to focus more on using his legs and trying to, kind of confuse Texas some of those ways? Because some of the plays, like, I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but, the Noah Thomas touchdown with a complete busted coverage in the Auburn game, I don't know if you're necessarily going to get those kinds of opportunities against Texas with how solid they've been in the secondary this year. But I think the ground game is going to be a big part of this for Texas A&M. And as we know, Texas is explosive offensively. So if A&M can kind of slow the game down a little bit, it's going to be loud, cause them some communication issues because, again, think about it for Texas this year. You had to go to Ann Arbor early in the year, and that's a tough place to play. But I think we now know that Michigan team really isn't very good, to be completely honest with you. But outside of that, I'm not saying going to Fayetteville and stuff isn't difficult, but you got Georgia at home. Like, this is your biggest challenge on the road, and it's coming at a time where everybody's questioning you. So how big of a factor does that play? We will see on Saturday. That's going to be an exciting one. Again, Texas versus Texas A&M. 6:30 kickoff on Saturday there on ABC. The winner advances to Atlanta to face Georgia in the SEC championship. But we have more rivalry week games to cover here in the SEC as well as college football as a whole. So we'll continue. Keep it locked here on Jocks 94.5 and countdown to kickoff.
Welcome back into Jocks 94.5. Countdown to kickoff. Damian Mitchell, Conrad Van Order, Molly Robinson holding things down for you for the Rivalry Week edition of Countdown to Kickoff. And we're brought to you by our friends at Dread River Distilling Company. We can't talk about them enough. We thank them. It's the season of Thanksgiving. So, yeah, we are thankful for them to represent us as well and just bring you this show because we wouldn't be able to do it without them. You got to get down there to 2400 at 7th Avenue South in downtown Birmingham. And listen, they got tasting rooms. They have, listen, if you're not going to be in Tuscaloosa, like I said, if you're not going to go to the game, you need to get down there to Dread River because you can get the great food, you get great ambiance, you get everything. I mean, if you want to celebrate with Auburn and Alabama fans, I'm pretty sure there's some meeting rooms where y'all can hash it out, watch a game, and just enjoy it. But I think it's a special place. The food there, of course, is top notch, and we talked about the quesadillas pretty much week to week, and I promise you, it is phenomenal food. You get phenomenal drinks, and also you get a chance to just see what Dread River's talking about. And it's a great spot, and they represent us here at Countdown to Kickoff. And we thank them so much for being in our corner and having us present you to Countdown to Kickoff. So we got some state battles. We got Tennessee and Vanderbilt, a game really and truly early on in the season. And kind of the midway point, it's okay. Well, this game's got a little bit more intrigue to it. I mean, now Tennessee, you have it right there. Thank Florida last week for knocking off Ole Miss. Thank Oklahoma for knocking off Alabama. And now you are jumped right back into the college football playoff conversation. And you're pretty much in if you win. So the thing is, they're going to Nashville. They're going to Vandy. And that's where Vandy does their magic, man. They knocked off Alabama in the regular season up there. Took a trip down to Jordan Hare, my apologies for all the Auburn fans. Jordan Hare knocked off Auburn to pretty much take state claim in the state. But now Tennessee's on the road. They go to Vanderbilt. And yes, I think the Cinderella story of Vanderbilt has kind of kind of lost its luster a little bit because they haven't been consistently winning. But I think for Tennessee, that loss against Georgia was a gut punch because it felt as though you got it right there at halftime. You're tied 17-17, and the offense just ran into a wall. And I think for Nico and this Tennessee offense, one, it's the same thing we've been saying about Jarquez Hunter and Auburn. Your best weapon is your running game. It is your running back. Dylan Sampson, over 1,300 yards rushing, leads the SEC in rushing touchdowns, and he's been your engine. So I think if Josh Heupel, to me, don't overthink it. This game may actually be lower scoring than people think because when we think of the Heupel offense, it's, they're averaging 50, 40 points. When they get into Power 5 competition, you've seen them kind of drop off because of the competition level on the other side. And this rivalry is, it's unique. It's not something we always lock in on. But because of what Vanderbilt's story has been this season, I wouldn't be surprised if we're getting into, the late third quarter into the fourth quarter where it's still a ball game either way.
Yeah, because, you even go back to, outside of really, I know South Carolina, they kind of got blown out a few weeks ago, but, you even go back to the LSU loss this week. That's a one-possession game. The Texas game, I know they had to score late, but that was a 3-point loss. And, of course, we know what they did to Alabama and some other teams along the way this season. So I think this is an interesting game because of what you said. Again, it's a rivalry game, so you kind of throw everything out the door regardless of that. But with how competitive Tennessee has been, it really feels like, I'm not saying I'm going to predict an outright upset, but it feels like maybe there's more of a chance here for this game to really be interesting. And especially, is this Diego Pavia's last game with Vanderbilt? I know he'll have the bowl game that he could play in, but, this would be quite a way for him to end his college football career would be with a win that would potentially knock Tennessee out of the college football playoff. And I look at this Vanderbilt team and, they're in the top half of the SEC when it comes to rush defense. And are you going to sell out and force Tennessee to throw the football? Because shockingly, for a Josh Heupel offense, that has been the weaker half of their offense, right? Dylan Sampson, who got robbed of a nomination for the Doak Walker Award.
Yes, he did.
That's neither here nor there, but yeah, he got robbed of that one. So are you going to be able to sell out and kind of force Tennessee to throw the ball and put the ball in Nico's hands and force him to beat you? Because I think that's the best path to victory if you're Vanderbilt. And we know for Vanderbilt, offensively speaking, we know what they're going to do with Diego Pavia, right? They're going to run the ball a lot. He's going to have a lot of carries. He's going to be able to move around and kind of have these RPOs, have these options. Does he go out right and run? Does he throw out to somebody in the flat? Things like that. What we've seen from Vanderbilt all year this year. And to their credit, they've been able to confuse a lot of people with that. And so, granted, there's a lot of tape out there and a lot of film from the season that Tennessee can go to and say, all right, well, let's identify some of these things that tricked up, teams like Alabama along the way. But there's just something about Diego Pavia where you feel like they're going to have a chance regardless. As long as he's on the field and he's anywhere close to 100% healthy, that they're going to have an opportunity. And, of course, they're already bowl eligible, so they're not playing for that if you're Vanderbilt. But going 7-5 with wins over Alabama and Tennessee, that would be I don't know how far you would have to go back. I'm not a Vanderbilt historian, but that would certainly be the most memorable Vanderbilt football season in my lifetime. And so there is a lot on the line there. But again, for Tennessee, as you said, are they going to go? There's two ways you can go here, right? Are you going to go the Ole Miss and Alabama route where you're in the college football playoff? All you have to do is beat a team that you are clearly better than, and you're good to go. You can sit at home. You don't have to worry about going to Atlanta. You're going to be in the playoff. Or are you going to let that pressure kind of get in your head a little bit? And as we saw Ole Miss and Alabama do last weekend, you're going to choke away an opportunity and potentially even letting Alabama or Ole Miss get back into the college football playoff mix. So there's a lot on the line in this game. I think the fact it is in Nashville, I know I'm not saying that jokingly. And it's not so much the fact that you're playing in Nashville as the fact that you're not playing in Knoxville.
Exactly.
That I think benefits Vanderbilt. So this is going to be a very interesting game here in the SEC. And college football playoff implications potentially on the line there if Vanderbilt can pull off the upset. Another game with some potential college football playoff implications is South Carolina and Clemson. So not an SEC on SEC rivalry yet. Who knows what the future may hold with realignment. But this is two ranked teams that I have to imagine are going to be kind of on that playoff bubble. And a win here for South Carolina, if they go 9-3, I think you're going to have a lot of people trying to make an argument for why they should be considered for the college football playoff. And they have had such an incredible season. But you look at this Clemson team, and it's honestly hard for me to figure out what to make of them, right? South Carolina, I can look at, okay, you had an early loss to LSU. You had an early loss to Alabama, but they were close games, competitive games. You could argue that, especially in the LSU game, they should have won that game if it wasn't for officiating. You only really have one ugly loss this year. You look at Clemson, they have two ugly losses. One came to Georgia, but then the loss to Louisville. But they had this stretch after the Georgia game where they were just beating down average to subpar competition in the ACC. Now, the last couple of weeks, you haven't really gotten that so much. I'm not counting the game against Citadel. So I think going into this game, I think if you're South Carolina, you have to feel really, really good about the position that you're in. And I mean, I'll tell you right now, I think that I would pick South Carolina to win this game. I think they are the better team right now.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think the momentum that South Carolina is really feeling because, to your point, they've really only had one bad loss where we just didn't, it wasn't our day. But, just to lose to Alabama the way that you did and to continue to fight the way that you did was very impressive. And I look at what South Carolina does defensively with Kennard and Stewart there on your back ends. They are such game wreckers that it just seems as though if Clemson doesn't have the identity offense, because I don't think Clemson's going to be able to run the ball on them. I really don't. And I don't mean this negatively about Cade Klubnik, but he reminds me so much of Bo Nix when he was at Auburn, where you have the talent is there, but it's something just not. It's either you're not gelling well, you don't feel confident. I mean, his legs are a weapon. You saw him have that 54-yard run. I think against Pitt last weekend. It's like, okay, well, he's got some juice. So I look at Cade Klubnik as he looks the exact same as he did when he was forced in as a starter early on. It's just never really developed into anything of significance. But I think for South Carolina, rather, what you're seeing from Lenora Sellers and what we're seeing from Rocket Sanders, it's Rocket has taken it back to the Arkansas days of toting that thing. And I see the development with Lenora Sellers. He's confident. His legs are still a weapon, but what he's been able to be as a passer is really starting to thrive. And I think for South Carolina, you just don't give Clemson hope. That's the biggest thing, because Clemson is just like they're the thorn in the side of, man, Dabo's gonna start chirping again, and I would much rather hear a post-game press conference with Shane Beamer just kind of throwing a slight jab or just having some fun with it. But I just don't want to hear Dabo at the end. Just don't let Clemson be your end game. I just don't let it beat this one.
Yeah, well, it's going to be an exciting one there as South Carolina will take on Clemson, what we expect to be a top 15 matchup there for rivalry week. And I'll just say this, if you're an Alabama fan, I think you want South Carolina to win. I think that might bode well for you. Again, it's a very narrow path that Alabama has to get back into the college football playoff, but I think a South Carolina win would benefit you more if you were in that category of hoping that happens. So when we return here on Countdown and Kickoff, we're going to wrap it up, the Rivalry Week edition. A couple more games we want to hit on briefly for you. So keep it locked here to Jocks 94.5 and Countdown and Kickoff. Welcome back in. Final segment, final few minutes here of Countdown to Kickoff for Rivalry Week. That is kind of hard to say, as I've now realized after saying it a few times today. But we're here, Conrad, Damian, Molly, breaking down all of the biggest games, of course, already talking about the Iron Bowl, Texas A&M, a few other games going on around the SEC as well that we want to hit on before we get out of here. But we do, again, want to remind you about our friends at Dread River Distilling Company. And part of what makes them so special is that they are a local distillery. They're at 2400 7th Avenue South. You're only going to find them here. The founder specifically picked Birmingham because of the community and because this is something that you can't get anywhere else in the Birmingham area, right? And so going to Dread River it's a unique experience. All the ingredients, all the drinks are made there in the distillery. They're all handcrafted. Nothing's being shipped in or anything like that. So you know you're getting good, clean, quality ingredients every time you go in there. Same thing goes for their food. They have a wonderful selection. Any kind of cocktail that you can want, they're going to be able to service you there. Full service kitchen, event space that you can have you have a wedding there, you can have a date night there, you can have a family get together, anything in between. They're going to have you covered there at Dread River, 2400 7th Avenue South. Again, thank them so much for everything that they do for us here on the show. All right, breaking down a couple of more games around the SEC here before we get out of here. So we've got, let's be honest, good rivalry games, but nothing that has college football playoff implications or, I wouldn't even say bitter rivalries necessarily, but some interesting games still on the schedule. We'll start off. You have Arkansas going on to take Missouri. Again, an Arkansas team that I would still say they've exceeded expectations this year, but they kind of lost a little bit of their luster going up against a Missouri team that, I'll be honest, if they win this game and get to 9-3, all things considered for this season, I think you have to be pretty happy with that if you're Coach Drinkwitz. I know you had your sights set on the college football playoff, but I think based on what my expectations were for them coming into the year, that would be pretty solid, Damian. So is there anything that stands out to you about this game, whether it's Arkansas trying to get a little momentum going into the next year, get that 7th win, Missouri going for the 9th win? Is there what are you looking for in this game on Saturday?
I think for me, Arkansas-wise, can you finally put it all together? Even if it's just the last regular season game, you still, potentially, you're still going bowling. And can Taylon Green show us what he kind of left out there? Like, I think for Arkansas, because we came into the season just with so many question marks and so many unknowns, it's okay, like maybe they can win a few, maybe, talent-wise it may be down. But I think now because I do think that they can survive a fist fight with Missouri, because the last few games I've seen Missouri, it's not that I still don't believe. It's just even last year, I feel the record doesn't really show what this team really is. Because like you saw a couple games where Luther Burden was nowhere to be found. Mm-hmm. And I think like they've just been so inconsistent. And a surprising stat that I'm just looking at it now, Andrew Armstrong is second in receiving yards from Arkansas. He has one touchdown in the entire season.
And over 1,000 yards receiving.
Hey, that's disgusting. Like, as a former receiver, that breaks my heart. It's like, wait a minute, I'm getting all these yards. I can't get in the dirt, dog. Like, what's going on? But I do think the balance that Arkansas possesses on the offensive side, I think their defense, they've had moments where it's like, okay, they can figure this thing out. Like, going back to that Tennessee game, it's, where's that defense at?
Look at Texas. They held them to 20 points.
To 20 points. Maybe Arkansas plays how we say that like good teams play down to their competition. It seems like Arkansas plays up. Like they get up and it's like, oh yeah, it's Texas and Arkansas. Nobody's really giving them a chance. Then they punch Texas in the mouth a couple times, but it's just, you need a little bit more there. You need a couple more Jimmys and Joes. But I think right now that you kind of have Missouri in that sweet spot of, yeah, maybe the season wasn't as good as we thought it would be, but I do think Arkansas can muck it up for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Another game you're going to get, I don't feel like we need to spend a lot of time on this one, but yeah, Florida State. I will just say this. Okay, we all know Florida State's been atrocious. Florida has shown some major signs of life lately. But if Florida goes into this game as they should expect to win, and you go 7-5 with the potential of going to a bowl game and getting 8 wins, hats off to Billy Napier and the job that he's done. And Florida is a team that I look at with DJ Lagway moving forward. They can be a real threat in the SEC as early as next year, probably.
Yeah, I think Billy Napier should get a Gatorade bath if they blow out Florida State, man, because this season has completely exceeded my expectations. The fact they were still competitive in a lot of these games. We looked at the month of November as that was going to be Billy Napier's swan song. Like, whatever happens in November, big dog, we'll see you on the other side. And then he messes around and beats LSU and Ole Miss, and it's like, okay, well, this team has definitely overachieved. And I do think the confidence and some of the throws and some of the plays that DJ Lagway is making, it's okay. He may have a little something down there in Florida, but I do think they handle their business with Florida State. I think it'll get ugly.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's in Tallahassee, so if you're Florida, just don't overlook it. It's a rivalry game. Anything can happen. Don't ruin the momentum that you built up, but I think Florida should be able to handle it. And then finally, Oklahoma and LSU, a bit of an interesting rivalry game, maybe a new rivalry they're trying to create here in the SEC. And I'll put it like this. You have an Oklahoma team that obviously just had their biggest win of the season over Alabama, an LSU team that's had a really rough stretch to end the year. I will just say this, as we saw against Alabama, Jackson Arnold can run the football. And as we know against LSU, they have a difficult time when a quarterback can run the football effectively. And I think that can be a big factor in this game. Granted, it is a night game in Death Valley, and that makes it interesting, but just saying, keep an eye on that aspect of the game if you like Oklahoma on the road.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. We saw what Jackson Arnold can do with his legs. Just don't have the replication of what Jalen Milroe did for you for LSU's defense.
Yes, absolutely. I think Brian Kelly would appreciate if that didn't happen. So, all right, that does it for the Rivalry Week edition of Countdown to Kickoff. Appreciate all of you joining in. Hope everyone got their Black Friday shopping done. Had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Hope you enjoyed the games this weekend. And we'll be back next week as we dive into the conference championship games and start looking forward to the college football playoff. It's almost here on Countdown to Kickoff. You've been listening to Jocks 94.5.